Are our schools safe for children? This video brings to you findings from the research study on acquisition of cognitive and affective skills in government schools and private schools across India. The CAS framework considers four areas to be critical for students' success and personal well-being, namely academic performance, social emotional skills, positive attitude, and a supportive school climate. CAS study collected data from students, teachers, principals, and parents in 550 government schools across 3 states and 26 top private schools across 5 metro cities. While measuring school climate, safety is considered as a key subdimension of a general school environment.
What do we understand about safety in schools, and what does the study bring to us about safety? So, as you can see, schools are not seen as secure, positive, or conducive to learning. And the extent of abuse that was reported in these schools were about 60%. So you could see the range of it going up to 62% and so on. That means 6 in every 10 students who answered or took part in the study reported physical abuse, for verbal abuse, or differentiated treatment in the government schools. Again, in the government schools, when you start looking at, so if you find that about 60% of students are reporting abuse, then what sort of abuse is this? So we looked at whether they are saying that this is teacher abuse, or whether they are saying that it is their peer abuse or schoolmates abuse, and whether they are saying whether it's physical abuse, like beating or giving physical punishment, or it is verbal abuse, as in, using abusive words, shouting at them and so on and so forth. So we found that 43 to 50% of students reported schoolmates abuse, and the teacher abuse was only slightly lower than this. It's about 38 to 43% of students reported teacher abuse. And when you look at or unpack it to see whether it is physical abuse or verbal abuse, again you would find 39 to 42% of students are reporting it as physical abuse, while there's a slightly larger number reporting it as verbal abuse. About 41 to 46% of students report this as verbal abuse. Again, this is the data in government schools. And you could see between the Andhra Pradesh, Jharkhand, and Rajasthan, which are the three different states, roughly you could say some state from the South India, some state from the West, and some state from the North India, and so on. You would find that the scores are not very, very different and are comparatively closely, appearing in terms of each of these aspects of abuse. Then when we looked at, so people said that there is abuse, and we also saw that the extent of abuse or the type of abuse. Then we try to look at it, where is this abuse happening? Is it happening in the lower grades, or is it happening in the higher grades, etc.? We found that in the government schools, lower classes reported more abuse than the higher classes. And especially in Rajasthan and Jharkhand, this was so. And the difference was comparatively higher. So the lower grades would have more abuse compared to the higher grades. Whereas in Andhra Pradesh, this difference was not very pronounced. You can see that, as you can see in the bars here, they are different, but it's not so pronounced. And you could also note that the physical abuse is generally more than the verbal abuse. And differentiated treatment from the teachers, you could see, or from the peers, it dropped in the higher grades. Whereas, especially in Jharkhand and Rajasthan, while no such change was seen in the case of Andhra Pradesh. Jharkhand and Rajasthan, again, girls reported more abuse than boys, whereas it was vice versa in Andhra Pradesh. In Andhra Pradesh, boys were seen to be reporting more abuse than girls. So the key takeaways from this slide, lower grades have more abuse than the higher grades, and physical abuse is more than the verbal. And you could also see that girls reported more abuse than the boys, except for Andhra Pradesh. Then we looked at schoolmates abuse, like how much peer abuse is happening, how much are students teasing each other and abusing each other. So you can find from this slide here that Jharkhand had the highest incident of abuse, followed by Rajasthan and then Andhra Pradesh. And abuse is more in lower grades, same like you saw in the teacher abuse. Abuse is more in the lower grades than the higher grades. And when it comes to peer abuse, verbal abuse is more than the physical abuse. So the takeaways, so when there is a teacher abuse, there is more of physical abuse than verbal abuse. But when there's a peer abuse, it's more of verbal abuse than the physical abuse. So these are the things that were emerging. Now let us look at what's happening in private schools. So in government schools, you saw that 6 out of every 10 students were reporting abuse. Whereas in private schools, these are elite private schools, the who is who in the school space, the type of schools. But 7 in every 10 students report physical abuse, verbal abuse, or differentiated treatment. And 41% of students report teacher abuse. So, which is somewhat closer to what you could see in the government schools. In the government schools, we saw 38% to 43%. Here, 41% of students are reporting teacher abuse, very similar to government schools. 63% of students report schoolmates abuse. So this is slightly different from the government school. So in a government school space, we found that up to 53% were reporting schoolmates abuse. So therefore, when you say that there is more abuse in private schools than the government schools, what is contributing to this difference? It is the schoolmates abuse. That is, the children are abusing each other in private schools more than what is happening in the government schools. And then when you look at when you say students are abusing themselves more, then what is this abuse? Is it physical abuse or verbal abuse? You can see that about 48% of the students are reporting it as verbal abuse. So in private schools, there is schoolmates are abusing each other more, and you would also see that they are abusing each other more due to their verbally rather than physically. And in private schools again, 28% of teacher abuse is physical abuse. So that means teachers rather use physical punishment rather than verbal scolding, etc., in a slightly larger proportion, and so on. And both in schoolmates abuse and teacher abuse, you would find about 15 to 17% of children are saying that they are treated very differently due to their gender, caste, or religion. Again, in private schools, you would find that there is not much change when it comes to abuse by teachers. There's not much change across the different grades. You can see on the bars that are there here, almost similar, you could say. And boys are reporting more abuse than the girls. So this is again what you could see in the similar to Andhra Pradesh here. Then when we looked at the schoolmates abuse, you will again find abuse is more in higher grades. That means in private schools, when abuse is happening, we said that there is more verbal abuse, there is more schoolmates abuse, etc. But this abuse is also more in the higher grades compared to the lower grades, especially when it comes to verbal abuse. You don't see such a pronounced difference, though it is higher in the physical abuse also. But you would find that when it comes to verbal abuse, more children are abusing. So you will find 60% of children are showing or reporting verbal abuse in the higher grades. That is especially in class 9 and so on. Then we looked at, the relationship of who are reporting about abuse to the different aspects. So you would find that and then children, when they were agreeing or disagreeing, we looked at some of the questions which is the question where or item where most high level of disagreement is coming in. So when we asked the question on are there clear rules in your school against abuse, at the teacher level, at the student level, and so on, and we found that about 35 to 51% of students reported that there is absence of clear rules, and these were the top 2 disagreements out of all the items that are there in the questionnaire. And when we link this data to the learning outcomes data, we also found that students who were reporting abuse also were scoring low in the academic test, that is the language and the maths test, up to about 8% points, which is a very large number given that this is a large sample and so on. An 8 percentage point is a really large number which would come up as significant and meaningful and so on. When we looked at principals reporting about abuse in government and private schools, we found that less than 10% of principals agreed that there is abuse in their schools, whether it is physical abuse or verbal abuse in the government schools. So at least less than 10%, where there were some principals who agreed that there is abuse. But when you looked at private schools, none of the principals agreed there is physical punishment or differentiated treatment, but about 9% agreed that there is some amount of verbal abuse. So this data that is coming out, where there's such a large reporting of abuse, about 41% of teachers abuse is seen in these private schools as reported by the students, would come as a surprise or a shock to many of the principals who thought that there is no punishment physically or differentiated treatment in the private school. So this is a point that they need to note. And then we asked also questions related to whether children were feeling that they are feeling safe in the school or near the school. And we asked these questions to teachers as well. So we found that in Jharkhand, 31% of students reported not feeling safe in or near school, compared to 21% in Rajasthan and 18% in Andhra Pradesh. And students in the lower grades also felt less safe and wished that they could study elsewhere than in their school. And interestingly, not only did the students report that they were not feeling safe, there was also teachers who were reporting that 13% to 4% and 8% of teachers in Jharkhand, Rajasthan, and Andhra Pradesh, respectively, reported that they were not feeling safe. So then we looked at whether this, people reporting that they were not feeling safe had anything to do with them wanting to study in a different school or work in a different school. We found that 21 to 29% of students, disagreed when we asked them, would you never wish to study elsewhere or go to another school? We found that 29% of them disagreed. That means that they want to go to another school. And 27 to 43% of teachers disagreed, and 36 to 45% of principals disagreed, saying that they would want to work elsewhere. So this is a very, very large number, if much higher than what the students say. Teachers feel that they want to go to other schools and not work here, or principals feel that they want to go to other schools and not work here. And this is a very important thing, or a cause for concern for all the policy makers. Because if people are wanting to opt out, then they are not really going to be having a sense of belonging towards that school, and therefore work for improving the school or the school climate and so on. And we also found that there was a positive correlation between those who said that they were not feeling safe and those who said that they wish to leave the school. So what it actually means, therefore, is that if you're going to be abused in the school, either by your peer or by your teacher, then you are not going to feel very safe. And as a result, you are likely to wish that you study elsewhere. And teachers also felt the same. Of working elsewhere, etc. So this could also be connected to their feelings of safety. Now let us look at how the private schools reported on this, etc. So 12 to 14% of students, compared to the larger number in the government schools. In private schools, students felt more safe, but still 12 to 14% of students felt unsafe. And interestingly, 14% of students actually said that they felt unsafe in a school, while only 12% said that they were unsafe near a school. So that means within a school, they were feeling more unsafe and so on, though marginally so. And 2% of teachers in private schools also felt that they were not safe. And when we looked at their school belongingness, we found that 1 in every 5 student, 1 in every 10 teacher, and 1 in every 17 principal in a private school wished that they worked elsewhere and they could leave for another school. The lower sense of belongingness was also seen in students, and this was also positively correlated with them not feeling safe in and near school. So if the child is not going to feel safe, same like in the government school, they are also not going to feel a sense of belonging, and therefore they wish that they can go to another school. And similarly, being abused by schoolmates and teachers. Not only the sense of not feeling safe, when we looked at who reported that they were feeling that they were abused, those students also were wanting to leave the school, and this was very positively correlated. And when we looked at in terms of like whether it is physical abuse or verbal abuse or discrimination, which is having a higher correlation, we found that discrimination on the basis of caste, gender, and religion was more correlated with the feeling of wanting to leave the school